can I request some remote data? Let's journey through some of the tooling that you can use in order to request data from an online source, right? So we can actually send GET and POST requests to a website. We can get the HTML response, or if it's an API, we can get a JSON response. So let's explore what some of these tools are. Namely, we have curl, wget, and HTTP from HTTPie. So I'll be calling it HTTPie. And so maybe your boss has noticed, some of the raw data is missing from the API responses folder. Can you scrape that for us again? Well, yes. And without even opening up Python to import requests or URL lib3, I can type 4 letters plus the URL and I get a file back. And here you can see I use wget to hit example.com/endpoint, and it has saved the response. In this case, it's a JSON response. And the weird thing is, okay, I don't see the output. It's saving to endpoint. So I have a file. Wget makes a file that's the same name of the output. Let's check that. We'll rerun it. Okay, and now when I maybe I'll exa my current working directory. You can see I have the example folder that we've been seeing and also a new file called endpoint. And so you have really your pick of tools in order to do scraping from the command line. You have HTTP, which a little bit more verbose, right? But it spits our output to standard out instead of automatically to a file. You can opt to put this into a file, but you don't have to. I can pipe this right into something like, since it's a JSON output, I can pipe it into something like JQ in order to do some querying on it and maybe trim it down before I save it to disk. Curl is a fantastic tool. You get the same kind of verbosity as wget. None of the response output, I just get the JSON. In this case, it's an empty JSON object. But what if I want to parse something, right? What if I want to download a file from the internet, just download it once, and then test some parser on it to extract some data? I can do that with the command line with wget. I can save, right, a website or a HTML response to a file, and then I can never hit that again until I'm done with my parser. So I can wget a file, and then I can work locally with my parser in order to figure out and extract just the contents that I want. And you can see here, I have written a short Python script that uses beautiful soup to read the contents of what wget gets for us. And if this works, it should report the current time and date in New York for us. So we can tell it's just a little bit past noon in New York. Time, date, location, fantastic. All in, 8 lines of Python and 1 call to wget. Didn't have to import requests. And what's fantastic about this is when I was building this, all I had to do was from my command line, wget, get the file, and then I never had to do that again. I could just open up Python, I could work on my parser until I got it right, and then throw it in here for the presentation together, and I only had to hit that API once. I didn't have to sit there and hit the API or the website every single time I wanted to get that file. One very powerful feature that I will actually not demonstrate for fear of the time that it takes to complete is called mirroring. wget can recursively get every single file that's publicly available from a website. This is very powerful if you're like me and in your free time read Python documentation. A little embarrassing to admit that, but in my spare time, I do enjoy reading Python documentation. If you're ever going on a trip and want to read through some documentation for anything, you want to save a website locally, you can use wget with its mirroring option in order to recursively get every single file that is publicly available on that website, and it'll build a local, essentially a locally hosted website for you, right, with no external calls. It's fantastic. But let's show off what else we can do with these things. Well, wget is not just for getting, just despite its name, right? I would think I would need a tool called wpost to do a post request, but you can actually post data to an API. And in this case, I posted data, I gave it a key of wget and a value of post, and then I told the endpoint that I'm expecting a JSON response back. And then I gave it the URL, and here you can see we've saved another file called endpoint, and then if I were to cat that file inside, you would see the JSON object of wget and post. Well, curl does this as well, a little bit less verbose, right? I can specifically give it the -xget, which is the default, or I can give it the -x with post, right? So now I'm performing a post request, and I'm feeding it this JSON object, and here you see that my output is returned, and it's just that JSON object. I can pipe that around, I can do anything with it. It's really fantastic. One thing I hope you notice from HTTP, I'm missing the content type header. Interesting. And not only am I missing the content type header, but I don't have to pass in an ugly double-quoted dictionary of key values in order to pass in JSON. I get my exact response back of HTTPie post in JSON just by passing arguments with an equal sign separating them. Very easy to read, and the reason that I don't have to pass in the content type application JSON in the header, that's the default header for HTTP. Modern developers, modern tooling, the world of the web works with APIs in JSON right now. And so that is why these are smart defaults to use for this technology. And we can even save that JSON to a file. And so here we'll see I save it to a file called hello.json. I can exa and search that file. And then I can use bats in order to parse its contents. And so this will show that I have, in fact, saved a file called hello.json, and inside of it is that JSON response of HTTPie equals post. So what are my thoughts on all this? Well, wget is very convenient, but it's a little bit different of a tool than curl and HTTP. Wget is great for caching local files or mirroring documentation, whereas curl and HTTP are extremely flexible in what they can do. I would say that HTTPie is more convenient to use as a CLI, command line interface, and it's great for just hitting an API, right? You don't need to specify too many arguments. You can just get that JSON response right back. Fantastic.